When David published his first 5,000 years of book in 2011, I'd been writing my history of debt for about 30 years, starting around 1981. And I began it because, as Nika said, I'm an economist. And I could see that the whole world in the 1980s was in a debt crisis, certainly for what they called the third world countries, the global south. In 1982, Mexico defaulted, and you had a whole decade of Latin American defaults on their foreign debt. My field was the balance of payments and international debt, but I'd also begun to work on the domestic United States debt. And it was obvious that debts were growing faster than the economies to pay. And I began to write a history of how different countries had dealt with the debt problem, that debts grow faster than you can pay. And it took me about maybe 2 years. I'd gone all the way back through ancient Greece and Rome, got back to Israel, and also Solon's debt cancellation in Athens. And I found scattered references to the fact that there seemed to have been a kind of Babylonian Jubilee year already in the second millennium BC, around the 18th century BC, when Hammurabi was around. And I tried to trace down what are these things. And the only way that I could trace them was reading all of the economic history material. At any rate, I got through some friends to join Harvard's Peabody Museum, which was its anthropology department, and working on Babylonian archaeology. And it soon became apparent that, yes, people who said there couldn't possibly be a debt cancellation, it wouldn't work, society would fall apart if you don't have the poor people pay the rich people and end up in bondage like it should be. And it turned out that there really were debt cancellations for thousands of years. Every Sumerian king who took the throne canceled the debts. Every Babylonian king who took the throne started his first full year on the throne by canceling the debts, starting all over again. And basically, they said they had a view of society very much like the year. It was a kind of social cosmology that whenever there was a new king, you had a new reign. And just like in England, you date the laws and anything that happens from the first year of, say, King George's reign, second year. That's how you did in the ancient Near East. You'd start it from the beginning of a reign, and every king wanted to begin the reign by getting rid of all of the imbalances that had developed since the last king ruled. And so the guaranteed way of getting popularity is you cancel everybody's debts. And I'll get into how that happened. At any rate, I had been, I organized a group of economists rewriting the history of the ancient Near East, the economic history. And we began to publish and hold colloquiums in 1994. And we published I think the last colloquium was in 2005. So by the time David published his book, I had not yet published what I call the popular book, Forgive Them Their Debts, but I'd published these colloquiums. And when I was negotiating with Yale University Press to try to publish my book, and all of a sudden, David's book came out. And people began to write me and say, oh, David's taken all of your ideas. This is awful. Nobody, he's scooped you. And the Yale University reader said, oh dear, nobody will read your book now. David's written his book, as if it's completely different. And obviously, they had not read David's book because David was very generous and open. David was my strongest supporter for my ideas. It was David who actually popularized my ideas to a much broader audience than I ever would have gotten talking to Assyriologists and archaeologists and people concerned with ancient history. David sort of popularized my ideas, but he put it in a more readable form than I did. He wrote as an anthropologist, and he wrote his book, as you know, largely from his personal experiences as an anthropologist, talking about personal ideas of and a narrative of the societies that he'd worked in and his ideas. My book was more historical, dealing, and all that we had to go on were royal proclamations that were inscribed and usually buried in temple foundations. And we had the lawsuits that were written on cuneiform records saying, yes, the debts really have to be canceled. You can't collect on a debt after the king has canceled them. So we wrote in a different tone of voice, and his tone of voice is much more popular. But it was David who got me to his publisher in Germany. We both had the same publisher for our books, and we right ever since he published this book, we did many things together. And so what I want to talk today are about some of the cosmology of canceling debts. There was an ideology of canceling debts. It's not simply that debts grew so fast and people who ran into debt were driven into bondage and they had to sell their land and lose their means of self-support to rich people. They did have to do this, but it was only temporary. The idea was that what happens today, in today's world, once you run into debt, you can lose your home, lose your job, and you go bankrupt and you give away your property, and you can't get it. You can't go back in time. You can't end things. Once you default on debt, it's there, and there's nothing you can do about it, and you lose everything. If the ancient Near East in the 3rd millennium BC, the 2nd millennium BC, if ancient civilization would have had the kind of rules that we have today, there wouldn't have been any civilization because it was an agricultural economy. You can imagine what happens. These economies operated on credit. And in fact, they operated on credit right down into medieval times in Europe. Let's say you begin the crop year. You plant. During the crop year, you have to run up debts. Sometimes you have to run up debts to pay for oxen, to plow the land or do something. You need to pay for seeds. You need just to pay for living. You have to give money to the church. Sometimes if you get married, you have to pay the priests. And if you go to a bar, you run up a tab at the bar to get beer. The same thing happened in Babylonia in around 1750 BC. During the year, the farmers cultivators would go to the bar, they'd run up the tab on the year, and all these debts that were run up during the planting season all came due at one time when the harvest was in. And we have the contracts for the debts, and that said the debts are all going to be paid on the threshing floor. The farmers would bring the grain that they grew into the temples or civic agencies that had the threshers. They'd measure out the grain, and they'd say, okay, this much goes to the ale lady to pay for the ale you've drank. This much goes to the palace for advances that it's done. This much to the temples. This much to any personal creditors that you may have had. Well, normally everything would go smoothly unless there was bad weather. If there was a drought or if there was a flood, then you couldn't have enough crops to pay the debts. What was going to happen? Well, you can imagine what the ruler thought. Well, if you can't pay the debts and you owe these people, I have a choice. Am I going to let all of the cultivators on the land, and we're talking about an agrarian society, am I going to let them all go broke and all of a sudden they'll be put into bondage? by their creditors, and they'll lose the land. Well, what's going to happen is the whole country will be in bondage. What are they going to do? Well, if that happened, a number of things would happen, would result. A lot of them would run away, and there were runaways throughout antiquity, or they'd have a revolt. They'd overthrow the king, or the creditors, who would be the wealthy oligarchy, would say, okay, now I have all these debtors that now work for me. I'm going to attack the palace and take over the economy and replace the kings that are supposed to be keeping order with a creditor-oriented oligarchy, just like we have in the United States and Margaret Thatcher and in England. They would have made Babylonia and Assyria, all over the ancient Near East, look like they do to that what Margaret Thatcher did to England and Ronald Reagan did to the United States, and it would look just as bad as today's mess of countries being in debt. So the kings would say in Hammurabi's laws, he said, if the storm god added causes a flood, debts are canceled. But even more important than Hammurabi's laws were the proclamations that he and every single king of his dynasty did as soon as they took the throne. They started the dynasty with a clean slate. They say, okay, we're going to begin the long cycle of society all over again with my reign, the way it should be. An ideal way. It's going to be in balance. The agrarian society doesn't owe any debts. The commercial debts among merchants, they were left in place, but not the personal debts of people on the land. They were all canceled, and the bond servants were free to go back to their own families. They didn't have to work for the creditor anymore. And the slaves that had been pledged to creditors also were still slaves, but they were returned to their original owners, the debtors who pledged them, and any land rights or land tenure that had been pledged was given back. This is familiar in Israel's, in Judaism's Jubilee year, word for word, taken from Babylonian practice, probably brought back by the Jews who were taken to Babylonia after Judea lost the war with it. They returned to Israel once the Persian king Cyrus said, yes, you can go back. They returned to Judea and essentially wrote the Bible and wrote the idea of debt cancellation all into biblical history. This is around the 5th century BC, the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. To say, well, we're not going to have kings cancel the debts anymore, because by the middle of the first millennium, the kings had become tools of the oligarchy, and they weren't nice kings anymore. They were very exploitative. So Judaism put this royal debt cancellation idea right in the center of its religion, taking it out of the hands of the kings and the civil authorities. That's sort of the big picture. And again, there was so much a disbelief that somehow society could work without creating an oligarchy to end up enslaving everyone else, like happened in Rome and happened in Greece, that they thought history couldn't have happened this way. All of this is sort of an utopian ideal about the Garden of Eden, and it just wasn't believed that somehow that could be that way. Well, David's book put the idea of debt cancellation into a broad public plane, and through what he did organizing Occupy Wall Street, made the whole idea of debt cancellation in the center of public discussion. And that's why the Obama administration one night sent police by all of the Occupy Wall Street things where there were encampments of supporters. If there were musicians there that would bring guitars and things, the police would smash the guitars, they'd smash anybody's computers, they'd beat up everybody. And Obama said, "We cannot have discussion of debt cancellation. My backers are the wealthy bankers. I work for the bankers, and we're gonna have the police beat you up, and basically we're going to blacklist you from jobs. You cannot discuss the concept of debt cancellation without being treated as a public enemy and being beaten up." That was a time when David decided, I think it's time to move to England. And he moved back there where he had a friendly professor at the university and was able to do his teaching. His teaching, I think, distracted him from a lot of the writing. He said what he ended up teaching was English as a second language to most of the anthropology students instead of teaching anthropology. And he couldn't say no when it came to helping people very much. So I'm not sure what he could do in England that that would be better than what he could do in the United States. But at any rate, what he discussed in his anthropological writing was something much broader than debt cancellation. He noticed that in all the anthropology societies, there was a problem of what do you do with egotistical people who want power? And the way you get power is to get wealth. And the problem that every anthropological society faced was, what do you do to prevent some ambitious individuals from trying to get rich by hurting other individuals? In today's world, if you take an economics course, they say private enterprise and the desire for wealth is what drives the world forward. But if any anthropological society would have done that in antiquity, then the wealthy people would pretty quickly have taken over society and essentially said, all the growth is going to be mine, not yours, and everybody would have run away, or they would have killed these people. So the challenge to anthropological societies was, how do we keep ambition, people wanting to get acclaim? We all like acclaim by doing something good. Well, it was by being civil. These were mutual aid societies, and you got a support not from accumulating wealth and saying, I'm richer than you are, and I can use my wealth to make loans to you and get you in debt and make you poor. It was by giving away money, by supporting society. So these anthropological societies based on mutual aid tended to grow, and they would attract population there. And they would attract especially populations from neighboring areas that weren't so positive, and people would run away and join these societies. That's how Rome was built by the kings. They said, we're going to establish a city for people who run away from oppressive realms. And if you come to Rome, we know it's not the nicest place. That's why we were able to settle here. There are a lot of mosquitoes on the Tiber, but you come here, we'll give you your own land. You can support yourself. We're going to protect you from being put in bondage, and you'll become a citizen and join our army. That's how they built up Rome until finally a group of oligarchs came from neighboring towns along with the runaways, and the oligarchy overthrew the kings in 509 BC, and the whole rest of Rome for 5 centuries was wrought by civil war, by debtors rebelling, wanting a debt cancellation and a redistribution of land. So that's how basically Western civilization began. And the reason David has been a common theme in his books is that anthropological societies have solved a problem that modern societies have not solved. They've been able to deal with, how do you let a society run up debt and not polarize it, not drive debtors into bondage. How do you get egotistical people getting public acclaim by helping other people instead of hurting them like they do today? that is what makes anthropological studies so different from economic studies, where it's all about how to get rich by taking the public domain into your own family, how to make a fortune by enclosing the land and taking it away from other people and charging them rent. That's basically what's happened in Western civilization. Well, you can look at the difference as a kind of how time is treated. The Babylonians had a mathematical concept of cycles of time that's much more sophisticated than the modern business cycle theory and theory of cycles. The modern cycle says, just get government out of the way. We don't need any government regulation. The free market is going to solve everything. And if the business cycle gets overheated, then it's going to crash. But then the crash will have an automatic stabilizer that returns everything to normalcy. And they think that somehow Western civilization is going to go right along pretty much in a nice smooth cycle. Well, look at what's happened since 1945. The whole world was pretty debt free in 1945 because there wasn't much to spend during the war. There have been a lot of cycles, but every cycle in the United States and England and Europe has started from a higher and higher debt level until today. Each cycle's recovery is slower and slower and slower because of this huge buildup of debt until now we're really in something that isn't a cycle, it's a chronic stagnation. It's in a chronic austerity, and you have the polarization between the financial creditor class at the top having all of the growth in national income, almost all has accrued to the top 1%. The bottom 90% have just about steady income. All of the growth goes to the creditors. And the result is that we're not growing anymore. Ancient society didn't have that problem. And when people talk about trying to treat money and credit and banking as a public utility, as it is, say, in China's economy, President Biden says, well, we're in a fight between American democracy and Asian autocracy. Well, what we called autocracy was what the Babylonian and Sumerian and Near Eastern rulers did. Autocracy is having the power to prevent a wealthy financial oligarchy from developing. And democracy is what Aristotle said, all democracies really are turned very quickly into oligarchies. And oligarchies do not permit any debt cancellation. Oligarchies say once you lose your land to the creditors get to keep it forever. And if you fall into bondage, when you can't pay your debt, you can't get out of it. Well, we all know what happened after when Rome did that. We had the Dark Age. And I think that today we're moving into a different a similar dark age, and in a way, what you could say, what David is writing has been saying is it doesn't have to be this way. Look at how other societies have dealt with the fact that they can grow without concentrating growth into the hands of a narrow minority of people. The ancient societies and the surviving local enclaves that have kept their indigenous practices, they've been able to continue in a stable way without disappearing from the scene. So it turns out to be democracies that are not able to solve the debt problem and restore balance because they're oligarchies. And it's the so-called autocracies where you have a single ruler that whose job is to prevent an oligarchy from developing that preserves stability and growth. So I think that's what distinguishes David's anthropological approach from the approach of most economists. And of course, I'm an economist, but I thought there has to be a different way of developing than running into debt bondage and polarizing society between creditors at the top and debtors at the bottom. So that's the common denominator between David's research and mine. But we're taking different vantage points from what we're describing. I better stop here. That's the halfway time, and this will leave halfway time for questions and discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. That's actually really amazing, and specifically about this cyclical time that I'm very interested, because I hope to write a book with you together, made differently times. So we have a discussion in the chat that is very difficult for me to follow, and I only see one question. Is it more questions? And if people want to just put up their hands.
Did I talk too fast? Did I actually go over everyone's head? Was it all clear?
Like you exactly half an hour. That's amazing. Yeah. So if I know that it's some questions were sent me via email. I see one question about American debt. Van Balachrishan, maybe you can ask it. Van, do you want to ask yourself?
Hi, yeah, thanks. Hi, David. I just wanted to ask, US debt is something like, or government debt is 125% of GDP. And I was wondering whether MMT means that the US can continue to issue and monetize its debt in order to fund its foreign wars without any consequence. Is that what MMT would say, or what are the kind of ultimate?
There are two kinds of debt. There's government debt and private debt. The MMT says that suppose that look at what's happening right now. If the government runs a budget deficit, it has to borrow from the wealthy class. And when it borrows, then it will take this money that the wealthy class holds somewhere and spend it into the economy. The government can do the same thing it can simply print the money itself. It doesn't have to borrow. And the effect of printing its money itself is exactly the same, no more inflationary at all than borrowing the money, because the billionaires who who put their money into government bonds are not the people who are going to the grocery store and buying more groceries instead of you and bidding up grocery prices. They only spend the money they make on stocks and bonds and making more loans. So it's not, you don't need to borrow money to actually create it. And in fact, it's much better if you don't borrow money. And in fact, if you don't have a wealthy class to control government at all. You can especially see this in the foreign money. I worked for the Canadian government writing a book about its foreign borrowing. And in the 1970s, the banks told Canada, well, you have a lot of provinces that want to borrow money. Why don't you let us bankers arrange to borrow Swiss francs or German marks? They don't charge anywhere near as high interest as Canada makes. So you can borrow that and pay only maybe 2% instead of the 6% or whatever you're paying. So Canada was convinced to do this. And what happened? The provinces would borrow German marks or Swiss francs. They'd turn it over to the central bank, and the central bank would create Canadian dollars to give to the provinces to spend. Well, I said, why do you need the German or French creditors to do this? If the Canadian central bank is going to create these Canadian dollars for spending anyway, why borrow at all? You're going to end up holding these this foreign currency in your central bank, but you don't need the foreign currency. It's all domestic currency. You might as well do it yourself. Well, the bank said, well, when the government creates money, it's inflationary. Look at Zimbabwe or look at Germany in the 1920s. Well, Germany had an inflation to pay because it had to pay reparations debt. I won't go into that, but it had nothing to do with the bank creating money to spend at home. It was creating money to pay foreigners, not to pay domestic people. There's junk economics. And basically, if you, the economic curriculum says there can't be any debt problem because we owe the money to ourselves. Well, the money we owe to ourselves, meaning the we is the 99% of the population, and to the ourselves are the 1% of the population. There's MMT says you really don't need for government spending to borrow money. Obviously, private credit is something else. And it would that's why China said, well, we've just had a revolution under Mao. We don't have a domestic financial class because they all went to Taiwan with Chiang Kai-shek. So we are going to create our society and create our own banking and our own money. We don't need an oligarchic class to borrow money from. We can simply print it ourselves. So that's basically what MMT says. You don't need a creditor class to provide the economy with money. Governments can create money, and the question is, how do you prevent it from being inflationary? Well, you give people need the money. Anybody can create money. How are you going to get other people to accept it in money? Well, you levy taxes, and people need the money that you print, if you're a government, to pay the taxes to you. And so there's a circular flow. You pay money into the economy. You tax basically the rentiers. You tax the financial sector. You tax the landlords. You tax the monopolists. You have a progressive income tax, and you get it back. And so there's no inflation at all. Is that clear? Did I explain that clearly?
Yeah, you did. I guess, is there any limit then to the US government printing money in order to fund its foreign wars, I guess?
Yes.
Is there a limit to that? Is there a constraint to that, Michael?
Yes. Yes. Question?
Sorry, Michael, I was just asking, is there a constraint
No.
to the US government printing money in order to fund its foreign wars?
Yes, it's called a pistol. It's called assassination. It's called it's called control of the educational system to say that this is impossible.
Right.
When the MMT graduates from University of Missouri at Kansas City look for jobs, their universities would say, well, what have you published in all of the most reputable economic journals? And the economic journals would not publish what the MMT people wrote because they said, don't talk about that in polite company. You know, that's not how we want the world to work. And so it's very difficult for MMT people to get their ideas published. And as I said, David tried to popularize it with Occupy Wall Street. He said, well, we're not going to go through the universities. We're going to go to the people. And as I said, that was put down with Obama's iron fist of just calling the police on them and smashing them up. How are economic students who study economics going to be taught MMT? They're not taught that way. And if they raise questions, they're not going to be promoted very well by their faculty or hired by respectable prestige faculties like Harvard or Yale or other universities, Chicago.
Yeah, so then we will make a course of in St. Vincent University where everybody can access this knowledge. So the next question is Julian.
Sorry, thank you, Michael, for that amazing presentation. So my question is very quick. Would anything change if the world economy stops being pegged to the dollar and becomes pegged to another currency, such as the yuan, for example? Is it still a political choice to pursue, that kind of imperial way of life and perpetuate debt, or are there other factors at play? Thank you so much.
It's not just changing currency, it's what are the rules of international payment? If you owe the money, how are you going to raise the currency? Like right now, the dollar is going way up in value against the Canadian dollar, against global South currencies. How are these countries going to get the money to pay the dollars? If they pay the foreign debts that they've run up, it's very much like the 1980s. If they have to pay the dollar debts that they owe, often to their own oligarchy, as well as foreigners, then they're not going to have enough money for the government to build infrastructure and spend on social improvements. The governments will be broke and essentially working as collection agents for the creditors. So, and if they were to owe the money in euros, it would be the same. Even if they owed the money in Chinese yen, that would be the same. So the question is, what are the rules you're going to put for collection? Well, back in 1944, when there was an argument over what kind of International Monetary Fund are we going to create, John Maynard Keynes said, well, you can have, we're going to set up countries that need to borrow money to pay, can draw on special fiat currency from the World Bank he's promoting. But if a country continues, like the United States, continues to run a big surplus over, let's say, a given amount over 5 years, then the surplus is wiped out. And if countries are pushed way into debt, the debt is wiped out. He had sort of a debt cancellation applied to the international intergovernmental debts. Well, needless to say, this is not how the United States wanted to set up the International Monetary Fund. It wanted to have all the money in the world and get everybody in debt to it. That's what my book, Super Imperialism, is all about. And by 1950, the United States had 80% of the world's gold supply, monetary gold supply, and other countries needed gold in order to pay their foreign debts, and they had to borrow the money, and ultimately they had to pay the debts by selling off their raw materials, selling off their oil rights, selling off their mineral rights, privatizing their public infrastructure and public utilities. And the result is a kind of financial colonialism. And what Donald Trump recently said is, we don't have to conquer countries militarily anymore. We can conquer them financially. We can use financial imperialism is what America is going to do, because we don't have an army anymore, because nobody's willing to fight an American army. We can hire terrorists' armies, and that is a foreign legion, but all we need is financial rules that are in favor of the creditors, and it doesn't matter what currency you own, you owe your money in, but you can use the debt leverage to take over other countries and control them.
Philip?
Yeah, many thanks for your presentation, really inspiring. So I have a question about the proposal of debt cancellation, because I remember in his conversation with David, Thomas Piketty said something along the lines of, the problem with debt cancellation is that the bankers agree with this proposal because they can, for instance, the last creditor might not be a rich person eventually. And if you do debt cancellation, you can eventually end up stabilizing capitalism, which is why he argued more for something like progressive capital tax. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on this kind of critique, or from the political economy perspective.
Well, on my website, and you can Google it, he and I had long discussions, and they're all published. There was also a whole volume book about his ideas that I had articles in. We've been discussing this for many years. He's hasn't pressed debt cancellation to the point that I have. His point is, number one, you want an inheritance tax because most wealth is inherited. And if you tax it away, that is a kind of cyclical point. You can accumulate a fortune and then the fortune disappears. You had a lot of fortunes in Babylonian times in the 19th, 18th century BC. But then in a few generations later, there's no sign of this fortune anymore. You didn't have long inherited fortunes creating dynasties. He wants to prevent dynasties from coming. Inheritance tax is one thing. Progressive taxation he's in favor of, because then if you have progressive taxation, you won't have fortunes built up like they are today, when the richer you are, the lower the tax rates you pay. And the really rich people don't have to pay any tax. The landlords don't have to pay an income tax because of all of the tax write-offs that they're given. Or they can operate of offshore banking centers and in tax-free banking centers and do that. So that's something. And I think over time he's come across more to the to agree that yes, you do need debt cancellations. But I can show you the banks really are not in favor of any debts being canceled to themselves. They want to be reimbursed for the cancellation. So if in the United States, if look at what happened after 2008, when the banks had suffered from these junk mortgages, the enormous bank fraud that led to the collapse. And Obama said, he said, I'm going to bail out the banks. They're my constituency. The banks won't lose money, but if the victims who signed the junk mortgages, they're going to lose their homes. I'm going to evict 8 million people from their homes, essentially to let the wealthy people buy up their houses and turn them into rental properties. But I'm going to make sure that no bank is going to lose the money because these, yes, they're criminals, but they're my criminals. That's my constituency. That's my donor class. So basically, as long as the banks have a thug in charge like Obama, they can manage to just always bail themselves out. So the way to prevent that is to have your slogan should be no more Obamas.
I just wanted to say that, yeah. I also want to ask one question about taxes that was by Stas Kraev. Stas, do you want to ask yourself if you're here, or do you want me to read it? Stas?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello, Michael. So we've been reading this David's piece against economics for this meeting. David there attacks a lot of microeconomists and neoliberal brand, whatever. So there are multiple things I could ask you about this piece. One that Nick refers to is a question of taxes. David has a thesis there that there are many more ways to do taxes rather than income tax. But we stuck with income tax because it is intentionally designed to be invasive, expensive, to feel a little bit unfair. And the point is to generate resentment to the government. So what do you think about like this two-side question? Are there really absolutely best ways to tax than income? And could it be that income tax is our go-to method because it is the best way to paint any tax collector as a bad guy?
I think we have a bad connection. Did you say a Trump tax?
Income tax.
No,
What tax?
Income.
Yeah, well, of course, the rich people, don't really make income. Only the poor people make an income, because if you make an income, you pay tax on it. The rich people don't want to make tax, so they don't make any income at all. What they want, if you look at the real estate fortunes, rent is for paying interest. So they'll borrow money to buy a building. They'll pay all of the rent, the income they get, they'll pay to the bank as interest. What they want is the capital gain. Almost all, there's a tendency of people to think that rich people get rich from saving up their income. That's what they're taught in universities. That's what Nobel Prizes are given for. It's absolute garbage. It's a distraction from how rich people really make their money, and that's capital gains. They get, there's asset price inflation. If you look at what's happened since 2008, there's been enormous growth in the stock market. From 6,500, the stock market has gone up 6 times since 2008, from about 6,500 to I guess 30. It's now up to 40,000, and the people's real wages haven't gone up at all. They've been absolutely stable. So stocks have gone up. You've had the biggest bond market rally in history. Real estate prices have gone up. But the wealthy people have paid less and less and less taxes, because there really isn't a tax very much on capital gains, or at least you don't have to pay it until you actually sell the building. But if you sell the building and you buy another building, or you sell a stock and buy another stock, then it's called preserving your wealth. And then when you die, there's no, you don't have to pay any of the capital gains. So the whole idea of, as if people get rich by saving, instead of creating an economy that inflates the price of housing, inflates the price of bonds by lowering interest rates, quantitative easing, inflates the stock market. That's how they get rich, and that's what is not taught at all in universities.
Mark?
Yes, hi, Mark
Hi.
Heath. Hi, Mike. Big fan of your work with Randall Ray and the archaeology of money back in the day.
Right.
I had a question about the grand dole of the Roman Empire, and specifically, I know that before he was assassinated, Julius Caesar was planning on forgiving the debts related to the grand dole. I'm a bit hazy on that. Would you please expound upon that, if you will, please?
Well, it turned out Caesar really only canceled the debts for the rich people. He had been a support of the debt revolution that the military put down. There was a whole Catiline conspiracy, where Catiline tried to have the very last protest of debtors in Rome. It was defeated, and Caesar saw that, well, he couldn't really do that. He saw that there was a debt problem, but he tried to keep the rich on his side, because it was an oligarchy after all. And so he ended up creating a complex bankruptcy law. And I've described this in my book, The Collapse of Antiquity. The bankruptcy law essentially freed the rich people from the debts that they owed, but not the poor people from their debts. But he was killed because the Senate and the oligarchy thought that, well, he supported the poor people who were debtors before, he may do it again. They killed him because of what they were worried he was going to do in supporting the debtors, not because of what he'd actually done so far. They knew where his sympathies lay.
So since we have only 7 minutes left, maybe we can take all the questions at once, and then Michael will answer.
I can't remember all of them at once.
No. Okay, so just try to be very short then. Matthew?
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
I'm struck that money is used for many purposes in society. It's fundamentally a sorting mechanism. It sorts out economic priorities, but it also accounts for them. And politics is another kind of sorting mechanism for priorities in society. And these two seem to be in conflict in a way. And what we see in America today is that the oligarchy have bought democracy, lock, stock, and barrel. And I'm wondering how we resolve this in the longer term, because we need to find balance. We clearly need to find balance and harmony, and the processes are just not working. Everybody knows nothing's working properly.
It's
How do we
working
make
just
it
fine
work?
if you're a member of the 1%. Working for whom? That's the thing. Unless
Working for the 99%.
they would have to develop their own economic program of saying, here is what we want as a political program here, and they haven't done that. And in fact, the BRICS countries have not done that either. They're reacting to the oligarchy making their economic position worse and worse and worse, but they don't have an alternative. So all they can do is saying, well, we don't want the Republicans, so we're going to vote in Biden. Oh, we don't want the Democrats, so we're going to vote in the Republican again. They're just bounced back and forth between parties that are really the same party with the same set of donors, and nothing's happening. So unless they develop a theory, I guess it used to be called socialism, there's not going to be much progress. And in Europe, it's only the right wing that is protesting against the system, but the right wing is not about to bring about socialism. So the United States has pretty much used its non-governmental organizations, the National Endowment for Democracy, and all these grant-giving organizations have found they're talent scouts. They look for people like Tony Blair or like Hollande and the French prime ministers. Or the German Social Democrats, Schulz. They look for people who are going to do whatever the United States tells them to do. And those are the people they promote, von der Leyen and others. And the 99% really don't have a clue as to how to develop their own party and their own candidates, largely because the mainstream press will not give them much attention. The media won't give them much attention. I guess they're all here on the internet today, and that's about it.
Michael, I've said, just a very quick supplementary, I've said for many years that the left has significantly failed to come up with and articulate a vision for society that people can buy into. And that's what's creating right-wing populism. The failure of figures at the top of the left to do
Yes,
this.
that's why David has talked about anthropology. He said, look, he knew that he could not convert the economist's profession, so he thought maybe he can go to anthropology and get a response that way. And I think that obviously I've followed him along that line.
Thank you.
Yes, there is one more question from Petros.
Oh, hi, thank you. Yeah, I just, first of all, thank you, Michael. That's been very enlightening. I just wanted to question the following. When we talk about debt cancellation as a concept, are we looking at this as a one-off, or are we looking at doing away with the concept of debt as something we need in the economy, in other words? Is debt necessary, in other words?
Well, here's the problem. When you cancel it's actually the good thing, the best thing about canceling the debts is you cancel somebody's savings on the other side of the balance sheet, because one person's debt is the asset of one of the billionaires who control the banking system. So canceling debts, you can think of it as canceling out the savings of the oligarchy. That's how you get rid of an oligarchy. Or if you're a socialist country, it's how you prevent an oligarchy from developing in the first place. So if you think in terms of a balance sheet, one person's debt on one side of balance sheet is a wealthy creditor on the other side of the balance sheet. You want both sides of the balance sheet to go down. President Obama canceled all of the what the 1% owed, but he didn't cancel. He saved the savings, but he didn't cancel the debts. So that's exactly what you don't want. You want a kind of anti-Obama to do that.
Okay, we're exactly 1 minute left. Can I also ask one question?
Sure.
So I'm actually interested in the concept of time, thinking about theory. So am I understanding correctly that one of the biggest problem is our perception of time in Western civilization when we think like progressivist, linear, and many other civilization think cyclically. So they kind of naturally canceling the debt, starting from all over again. But it's very difficult and complicated to attack the very idea of what is time. And I want to point out that Russian Revolution, French Revolution, they all started from making their own calendar, just setting everything straight. So and I know that you are anthropologist as well, so can we look for other civilization maybe or other models to inspire us?
Well, there's the whole concept of New Year throughout the whole world,
Oi.
and certainly in Asia. On the New
I
Year,
can't hear.
in the New Year, you clean
Is
your
it only
house.
me?
You go from door to door. You pay all the debts that you have to everybody.
Hello?
You put everything in balance.
Michael,
Western,
is it only me or everybody else too?
Nico,
Can you hear
have
me?
to mute your mic.
I can hear him fine.
I hear it.
Can
I
you hear
can-
me?
fine.
Yes, it's only Nika.
I think Nika
Oi,
can
oi.
hear you, Michael. Hang on, let me just have chat.
Wait, so you cannot hear me?
Nika can't hear you.
Something happens. Oi.
I have no idea. I haven't done anything here. Somebody turned me off there. Huh.
No, it's not on your. It's fine. We can hear you, and you can hear me. I believe. I think.
Yeah,
Nika,
Michael, continue. Don't worry, continue.
Can you hear me yet?
Now I can. Yeah, sorry about this.
I don't know what to say. Everything's on. Let me take a look.
Everything is fine now.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
That's
Then I have no idea what happened. Okay. The whole Western idea of progress is linear. It goes in one direction. As Margaret Thatcher would say, there is no alternative. Once you created a wealthy billionaire class, you can't take the billionaire away. You can't start all over again. You can't go back to the beginning and put society in balance. Ancient society and anthropological society said, we know that there are always going to be inequities developing. There are always going to be imbalances and debts that accrue. We want to get rid of all of these problems that occur. We want to start everything in order where nobody owes anything to anybody and life is beginning like it should in a smooth way, so that we don't have to, but they knew that it was going to get out of order again. They knew that every economy gets unbalanced over time, and so you need to continually begin again. And that was the concept of circular time that they had in antiquity.
Great. Yeah. So thank you so much. I don't know if anybody wants to say something as a closing statement. I don't know who. Chris, maybe you want to say something? Okay. Thank you so much, Michael, for coming. We will put a video online and send it to you too. And if you're okay with that, I can publish your notes. That is really beautiful text, summarizing this discussion.
Okay, it's just not to publish my notes. Those were from something that I'm writing on. Best just to publish this on, or just to publish the video.
Okay, cool. Yes, I will do that.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And so we will have our next meeting with Steve Keen. in a month. So everybody welcome. And I see you, Michael, in New York soon.
Good. See you then, Nika.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.